I stood behind that marble column at my son's engagement party, champagne glass trembling in my hand, listening to words that would change everything between us forever. Ashley was speaking to her maid of honor, just 10 feet away, her voice barely above a whisper, but every word cut through me like broken glass. She was explaining her plan to have me declared mentally incompetent within the year. The beach house in Encinitas that my late husband Eduardo and I had bought 30 years ago, where Miguel learned to body surf, where we had celebrated every anniversary until cancer took Eduardo 3 years ago. That house was her real target. Ashley told her friend it would be simple. Document my forgetfulness, my confusion, my inappropriate decisions, then have me evaluated by professionals who understood these situations. My name is Carmen Rodriguez, and at 58, I thought I had seen every kind of heartbreak life could offer. I was wrong. The Pacific View Country Club sparkled around us that October evening in 2024. 200 guests celebrated my son Miguel's engagement to this beautiful 26-year-old woman who had swept him off his feet in just 6 months. White roses and eucalyptus draped every surface, and the sunset painted the coastal hills in shades of gold that should have made everything perfect. Instead, I found myself hiding behind architectural details, eavesdropping on the woman who was about to become my daughter-in-law as she planned my destruction. Ashley's friend asked if the plan was not a bit harsh, and Ashley's laugh sent ice through my veins. She explained how I was alone in that big house, how it was actually merciful to get me proper care, how Miguel deserved his inheritance after everything I had apparently put him through. Everything I had put him through. I had raised that boy alone after Eduardo died, worked double shifts as a high school principal to keep him in private school, sacrificed my own dreams so he could chase his in tech sales. But Ashley saw an obstacle to be removed, not a mother who had given everything for her child. I stepped back from the column, my heart hammering against my ribs. Across the room, Ashley caught my eye and waved that radiant smile plastered across her face like a magazine cover. I waved back because that's what mothers do at their children's celebrations. We smile and wave and pretend our world is not crumbling. But I want you to know something about pretending. After 58 years of life, 35 years of marriage, and 3 years of widowhood, I had become an expert at it. If you are watching this story unfold, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Because what happened next proves that sometimes the most dangerous predators come disguised as the people our children love most. 4 months before that devastating revelation, Miguel had brought Ashley home to meet me for the first time. I remember standing in my kitchen that warm June evening, watching my 29-year-old son practically vibrate with excitement as he introduced this stunning blonde woman who looked like she had stepped out of a wellness magazine. Ashley gave me one of those perfect hugs that felt rehearsed, telling me how much Miguel had spoken about me, how she had been dying to meet the incredible woman who had raised such an amazing man. Even then, something felt orchestrated about her enthusiasm, too polished, like she had practiced this moment in front of a mirror. We sat in my living room overlooking the canyon, and Ashley complimented everything from my Talavera pottery to my choice of coffee blend. Miguel hung on her every word like she was delivering profound wisdom instead of small talk. When I asked how they had met, Miguel jumped in before Ashley could answer, explaining about the gym, how he had helped her with equipment she was struggling with. But then Ashley laughed and corrected him, admitting she had not actually been struggling at all. She had been watching him work out for weeks, she said, trying to figure out how to approach him. She had deliberately pretended to need help with weights she could handle perfectly well. At least she was honest about being calculating, I thought. That should have been my first real warning. When I asked about her work, Ashley explained that she had transitioned from social services into wellness coaching. Social services, she said, helping families navigate difficult situations, but now she was focusing on holistic health and life coaching. The way she described her background felt vague, like she was painting with broad strokes to avoid specific details. Over the following weeks, Ashley became a constant presence in my home. She would arrive for dinner without invitation, rearrange my spice cabinet to be more efficient, and offer unsolicited advice about everything from my garden irrigation to my investment portfolio. She would mention how stressful it must be for someone my age to handle complex financial decisions. How maybe Miguel could help shoulder some of that burden. Miguel, who had never shown interest in my finances before Ashley arrived. Miguel, who had asked me for money 3 times that year to cover his credit card payments from his previous relationship. But Ashley framed her suggestions as concern for my well-being, worry about me being isolated in my large house, alone, like it was some kind of medical condition that needed treatment. The worst part was watching my son transform before my eyes, becoming someone I barely recognized. The changes in Miguel happened so gradually that I almost missed them at first. My son, who used to call me every Sunday morning to check in who brought me gardenias on Mother's Day because he remembered they were my favorite, who had spent hours helping me sort through Eduardo's belongings after the funeral, suddenly became too busy for our weekly traditions. When I asked about our missed Sunday calls, Miguel explained that Ashley thought we spent too much time together. She had told him it was not healthy for a man his age to be so dependent on his mother. Dependent. The word stung because it was so backwards. Miguel had been living in my converted guest house for 2 years, paying minimal rent while he rebuilt his finances after his previous girlfriend had maxed out his credit cards. Ashley had opinions about everything in my life, delivered with that sweet smile and concerned tone that made disagreeing with her seem unreasonable. She suggested I might benefit from meal delivery services instead of cooking for myself, that my garden was too much work for someone my age, that managing rental properties was probably overwhelming, given all the new technology and market changes. She spoke about my age constantly, as if 58 meant I was already 1 foot in the grave. Ashley was 26, barely out of college, but she discussed my capabilities like she was a geriatric specialist, instead of someone young enough to be my daughter. The most unsettling part was how she positioned herself as Miguel's protector. She would mention how stressed he seemed after visiting me, how my expectations were becoming a burden for him, how she worried about the pressure I was putting on him to maintain our relationship. She painted our mother-son bond as something unhealthy, codependent, something that needed professional intervention. When Miguel announced they were moving in together into the rental house I owned on Maple Street, the property I had bought as an investment 3 years earlier, Ashley immediately started referring to it as their home. She redecorated completely, throwing out furniture that did not match her aesthetic and replacing it with expensive pieces that looked like they belonged in a design magazine. The utility bills stopped coming to me, but the mortgage payments never started coming from them. When I mentioned this to Miguel, Ashley would answer his phone, explaining that money was tight with moving expenses and her business startup costs, asking if we could push the payments back just 1 more month. Like they were some established partnership instead of 2 people who had known each other for less than 6 months. Meanwhile, a brand new Tesla appeared in my driveway where Miguel's old Honda used to sit. By September, the inconsistencies in Ashley's stories were becoming impossible to ignore. She claimed to be launching a wellness coaching business with investor backing, but when I asked casual questions about her clients or business model, her answers were always vague. She would mention meetings with potential partners, but never specific names or details that would make her venture seem legitimate. Her background in social services became more concerning the more I thought about it. Ashley had mentioned helping families navigate difficult situations, but she was particularly knowledgeable about mental health evaluations in elder care services. She would casually drop terms like competency assessments and family intervention strategies into conversations, always in the context of helping people, but the clinical precision of her language felt rehearsed. Miguel's transformation was accelerating. My son, who used to share everything with me, had become secretive and defensive. When I drove by the Maple Street house one afternoon to check on a maintenance issue, I found him hostile about my presence on my own property. He accused me of being controlling, of using the house as leverage to manipulate their relationship. The conversation that broke my heart happened on a Tuesday evening in early October. Miguel came to see me alone, which had become rare, and told me that Ashley was concerned about my behavior. She had noticed that I repeated stories sometimes, that I seemed confused about dates and appointments, that my decision-making was becoming erratic. When I asked for specific examples, Miguel mentioned that I had told the same story about Eduardo's garden twice in one evening, that I had forgotten about their dinner plans the previous week, that my sudden interest in their finances seemed obsessive and inappropriate. But I had not forgotten any dinner plans, because we had not made any. I had repeated the garden story because Ashley had asked me about it twice, acting like she was hearing it for the first time each occasion. And my interest in their finances was simply a property owner wanting to know when tenants planned to start paying rent. Ashley was creating a narrative carefully documenting incidents that could be interpreted as signs of cognitive decline. She was building a case against me, using my own son as a witness to my supposed deterioration. The most chilling moment came when Miguel suggested that maybe I should consider downsizing, that the beach house was too much responsibility for someone my age, that Ashley knew people who specialized in helping families transition through these difficult decisions. I realized then that I was not just losing my son's trust. I was losing everything Eduardo and I had built together, one carefully orchestrated conversation at a time. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in Eduardo's old chair on our bedroom balcony, looking out at the moonlight dancing on the Pacific, and tried to piece together what I knew about Ashley Chen. Her knowledge of elder care terminology was not casual familiarity. It was professional expertise. The next morning, I called my friend Maria Santos, a detective with the San Diego County Sheriff's Department, who had helped me navigate the legal complexities after Eduardo's death. Maria and I had known each other since high school, and she was one of the few people who would understand my concerns without dismissing them as paranoid delusions. When I explained Ashley's background and behavior patterns, Maria's silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. She told me she had seen similar cases, situations, where people with professional knowledge of the elder care system used that expertise for personal gain. She offered to run a background check quietly and unofficially, just to put my mind at ease. 3 days later, Maria called me back with information that made my blood run cold. Ashley Chen had indeed worked in social services, specifically in adult protective services in Orange County. Her job had involved evaluating elderly individuals for competency, recommending interventions for families in crisis, and coordinating with medical professionals for mental health assessments. But Ashley's employment had ended abruptly 18 months ago, following an internal investigation into irregularities in several of her cases. The investigation had been inconclusive, but there were concerns about her relationships with family members of her clients, particularly adult children, who had benefited financially from her recommendations. Maria found 2 civil lawsuits filed against Ashley in Arizona and Nevada, both involving elderly individuals who had been placed in care facilities after Ashley had consulted with their families. In both cases, the families had gained control of significant assets, and in both cases, the elderly individuals had died within months of being institutionalized. The lawsuits had been quietly settled out of court with sealed records and non-disclosure agreements. But the pattern was clear. Ashley targeted vulnerable, elderly people through their adult children, systematically isolated them from support systems, documented signs of incompetence, and facilitated legal proceedings that transferred control of their assets to family members who were grateful enough to share the wealth. What made Ashley particularly dangerous was her professional credibility. She knew exactly how the system worked, which doctors to recommend, which legal steps to take, how to build an unassailable case for incompetency. And now she had Miguel convinced that his mother was showing signs of mental decline that required immediate intervention. Our traditional Sunday dinners had been sacred in the Rodriguez family for as long as I could remember. Eduardo and I had started the tradition when Miguel was small, gathering around our dining room table to share homemade pozole or carnitas, talking about the week ahead, maintaining the connections that held our family together through good times and bad. After Eduardo died, these dinners became even more important. Miguel and I would cook together, sharing stories about his father, planning small adventures, keeping our bond strong, despite the grief that threatened to pull us apart. For 3 years, we had rarely missed a Sunday. But since Ashley arrived, everything changed. Miguel would call Saturday evening to cancel, explaining that Ashley was not feeling well, or they had other plans, or she thought they needed alone time as a couple. When they did show up, Ashley would arrive with her own food contributions, healthier alternatives to my traditional recipes that she had researched for their nutritional benefits. She would compliment my cooking while subtly suggesting improvements, mentioning how much sodium was in Mexican cuisine, how heavy meals affected sleep patterns, how people our age needed to be more conscious of heart-healthy options. Our age. She was lumping me in with Eduardo's generation, as if 58 meant I needed the same dietary restrictions as someone 20 years older. The conversations during these dinners became stilted, filtered through Ashley's commentary about healthy communication and family dynamics. She would interrupt stories about Miguel's childhood to redirect toward more positive topics, explaining that dwelling on the past was not emotionally productive. She would suggest we focus on future goals instead of nostalgic memories. When I mentioned missing our weekly phone calls, Ashley would explain how important it was for couples to establish boundaries with extended family, how too much contact with parents could interfere with relationship development. Extended family. I had become extended family in my own son's life. The final Sunday dinner we shared together was in late October. I had made Miguel's favorite mole poblano, the recipe Eduardo's mother had taught me 40 years ago, a dish that took me 2 days to prepare properly. Ashley took small, polite bites and spent most of the meal discussing a documentary she had watched about memory care facilities, how wonderful they were becoming, how many families found them to be perfect solutions for aging parents who needed more structure and support. Miguel nodded along enthusiastically, asking questions about amenities and care levels, like we were discussing vacation resorts instead of places where people went to die. When they left that evening, I knew it would be our last Sunday dinner together for a very long time. November brought a new level of concern from Ashley about my financial management. She would mention during our increasingly rare conversations how overwhelming it must be for someone my age to handle multiple properties, investment accounts, and business decisions without Eduardo's support. She spoke about my widowhood like it was a disability, something that had fundamentally compromised my ability to function independently. Ashley had researched my assets thoroughly, somehow knowing details about my rental properties, my retirement accounts, even the approximate value of the beach house. She would bring up these topics casually, expressing worry about the stress I must be under the burden of making complex financial decisions alone, the risk of making mistakes that could impact my future security. She suggested I might benefit from professional help, financial advisors who specialized in elder care planning, attorneys who understood the unique challenges facing widowed women. When I mentioned that I already had trusted professionals handling my affairs, Ashley would nod sympathetically and comment that many older people became too attached to outdated advisors who did not understand modern strategies. The rental property situation had become completely untenable. Miguel and Ashley were 6 months behind on payments they had originally agreed to start after 1 month. When I brought this up directly, Ashley would handle the conversation, explaining that Miguel was too stressed about disappointing me to discuss money comfortably. She had positioned herself as the mediator between us, the reasonable voice trying to protect both sides from conflict. She would present detailed explanations for their financial difficulties. Ashley's business startup cost Miguel's reduced commission structure at work, unexpected expenses from combining their households. But somehow, they had managed to lease luxury vehicles, redecorate the house with expensive furniture, and take weekend trips to wine country that Miguel posted about on social media. Ashley suggested we formalize a different arrangement, perhaps transferring ownership of the Maple Street property to Miguel as an early inheritance, which would eliminate the stress of monthly payments and give them the security they needed to build their future together. She framed this as a gift I could give while still alive to enjoy seeing its impact rather than something they would inherit eventually anyway. When I declined this suggestion, Ashley's demeanor shifted slightly. She mentioned how rigid thinking often developed with age, how fear of change could prevent people from making decisions that benefited everyone involved. She suggested that maybe we should all sit down with a family counselor who could help us navigate these complex emotional and financial dynamics more effectively. The trap was closing around me, one reasonable-sounding suggestion at a time. On a gray December morning, I drove downtown to the offices of Valdez and Associates, the law firm that had handled Eduardo's estate and my family's legal matters for over a decade. Roberto Valdez had been Eduardo's fraternity brother at UCSD, a friendship that had evolved into a trusted, professional relationship spanning 30 years. I sat across from Roberto's mahogany desk, looking out at the harbor where sailboats bobbed in the winter swells, and told him everything. Ashley's background in elder services, her systematic approach to documenting my supposed decline, her financial manipulations, and most importantly, her overheard conversation about having me declared incompetent. Roberto listened without interruption, taking careful notes, his expression growing more concerned with each detail I shared. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and explained that what I was describing sounded like a sophisticated elder abuse scheme, one that exploited both the legal system and family relationships. He told me about other cases. He had seen situations where adult children were manipulated into believing their parents were incompetent, where professional caregivers or romantic partners orchestrated elaborate scenarios to gain control of assets. The most successful schemes involve people with inside knowledge of how competency evaluations worked, people who knew exactly which behaviors to document and which professionals to recommend. Roberto's advice was both practical and sobering. If Ashley was building a case for my incompetency, I needed to build a stronger case for my mental acuity and financial responsibility. This meant comprehensive medical evaluations from doctors of my choosing, detailed financial records showing sound decision-making, and most importantly, strategic moves that would protect my assets before any legal challenges could be mounted. We discussed putting both properties up for sale, immediately liquidating assets into accounts that would be harder to challenge or freeze during competency proceedings. Roberto explained that this would also serve as evidence of my sound judgment, showing that I was making rational decisions to simplify my portfolio and secure my financial future. The hardest part was his recommendation about Miguel. Roberto advised documenting every interaction with my son and Ashley, keeping records of their financial requests and broken promises, building a paper trail that would demonstrate the manipulation I was experiencing. It felt like preparing for war against my own child. But Roberto reminded me that I was not fighting Miguel. I was fighting for him. Ashley was using my son as a weapon against me, and the only way to save our relationship was to expose her manipulation before it destroyed us both completely. Roberto connected me with a private investigator named Elena Morales, a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes and elder abuse cases. Elena had 20 years of experience tracking con artists who targeted vulnerable populations, and she understood the urgency of my situation. Within a week, Elena had compiled a comprehensive report on Ashley Chen that made my worst suspicions seem optimistic. Ashley was not just experienced in elder abuse. She was a serial predator with a documented pattern spanning multiple states and at least 7 victims over the past 5 years. Her real name was Ashley Martinez, though she had used various surnames depending on the situation. The Chen identity appeared to be relatively recent, adopted when she moved to California 18 months ago. Elena found records of her previous schemes in Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado, each following the same methodical pattern I was experiencing. In Phoenix, Ashley had targeted a widowed aerospace engineer named Robert Chen, whose adult daughter had become convinced that her 73-year-old father was developing dementia. Ashley had volunteered to help coordinate his care, eventually moving into his home as a live-in companion. Within 8 months, Robert was placed in a memory care facility, and his daughter had gained power of attorney over his $2 million estate. Robert Chen had died in that facility 6 months later alone and confused, while Ashley and his daughter split the proceeds from selling his home and liquidating his investments. The daughter later discovered that Ashley had been documenting normal age-related forgetfulness as signs of severe cognitive decline, coaching family members to interpret every minor confusion as evidence of incompetence. In Las Vegas, Ashley had manipulated a retired casino executive's son into believing his father was being financially exploited by scam artists. She had helped document the father's supposedly erratic financial decisions, which were actually sound investments the old man had made independently. The father spent his final 2 years in a state-run facility, while Ashley and the son enjoyed his former penthouse and investment portfolio. Elena found at least 3 other similar cases, each involving elderly individuals who had been systematically isolated from their support systems, documented as incompetent and institutionalized, while family members gained control of their assets. In every case, Ashley had been present as a helpful professional or romantic partner, guiding families through the complex legal and medical processes involved in competency proceedings. The most chilling detail was Ashley's collection of jewelry and personal items from her victims' trophies she kept as reminders of her successful schemes. The engagement ring she wore, the one Miguel had supposedly saved months to buy, had belonged to Margaret Thornfield, a retired teacher from Tucson who had died in a care facility while Ashley spent her life savings. Christmas Eve, 2024 arrived with unseasonable warmth and an announcement that should not have surprised me, but still hit like a physical blow. Miguel called that morning, his voice bubbling with excitement, as he told me that he and Ashley had gotten engaged the night before, during a sunset dinner at La Jolla Cove. They had been dating for exactly 6 months, a timeline that would have concerned any rational parent, but Miguel spoke about their future with the certainty of someone who had known Ashley for years instead of seasons. He described the proposal in romantic detail, the ring hidden in champagne, Ashley's tears of joy, their plans for a spring wedding that would give them time to plan something beautiful but not too elaborate. When I asked if I could see the ring, Miguel invited me to brunch the following day at the Hotel del Coronado, a public setting that felt deliberately chosen to prevent any private conversation between us. Ashley wore the engagement ring like a trophy, a vintage Art Deco piece that caught the sunlight streaming through the restaurant's windows. She told me the story Miguel had rehearsed about how he had saved for months to buy it from an estate jewelry dealer in La Jolla. But I recognized that ring from Elena's investigation files. It had belonged to Margaret Thornfield, the retired teacher from Tucson, whose granddaughter had described it in her victim impact statement as a family heirloom that had mysteriously disappeared before Margaret's estate was settled. Ashley dominated the conversation during brunch, discussing wedding venues and guest lists with an enthusiasm that felt calculated rather than genuine. She mentioned several locations in Encinitas and Del Mar, all expensive oceanfront properties that would require significant financial investment. When I asked about their budget for the wedding, Ashley explained that they were hoping family would contribute to making their dream celebration possible. Miguel nodded along eagerly, adding that this was going to be the only wedding either of them would ever have, so they wanted it to be perfect. Ashley smiled at him with such apparent adoration that anyone watching would have seen a young woman deeply in love with her fiancé. But I saw something else in her expression, satisfaction at how completely she had captured her target. The most devastating moment came when Miguel asked if they could have the wedding reception at the beach house. He painted a picture of intimate ceremony on the Sand family and friends celebrating under the stars, a perfect beginning to their marriage in the place that meant the most to our family. Ashley C's smile grew even brighter as she agreed that the beach house would be absolutely perfect for their special day. January brought the phone call I had been expecting but dreading. Roberto confirmed that both properties had sold the transactions completed with remarkable speed due to the below-market pricing we had strategically chosen. The beach house in Encinitas went to a young family from Los Angeles who appreciated its vintage charm and oceanfront location. The Maple Street rental property sold to an investor who planned to renovate it for long-term tenants. Signing those final papers felt like dismantling my entire life. The beach house had been Eduardo's and my sanctuary, the place where we had celebrated anniversaries, where Miguel had taken his first steps on the deck overlooking the Pacific, where I had scattered Eduardo's ashes from the rocky point 3 years ago. Every room held memories that I was now converting into liquid assets for protection against my son's fiancé. The financial strategy was sound, but emotionally devastating. Roberto had structured the sales to maximize my legal protection, depositing the proceeds into accounts that would be difficult to challenge during competency proceedings. We had created a paper trail showing deliberate downsizing decisions, evidence of sound financial planning rather than impulsive or confused behavior. I moved into a smaller oceanfront condo in Carlsbad, a beautiful 2-bedroom unit with panoramic views that required no maintenance and provided the security of a gated community. The downsizing was practical and appropriate for someone my age, but it felt like exile from the life Eduardo and I had built together. Miguel's reaction to discovering the sales was explosive. He arrived at my new condo unannounced on a Tuesday evening, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. He accused me of betraying our family, of destroying his inheritance, of making irrational decisions that proved Ashley's concerns about my mental state were justified. When I explained that the properties were mine to sell as I chose, Miguel's response broke my heart. He told me that Ashley had predicted this would happen, that elderly people often made dramatic financial decisions when they felt their control slipping away. She had warned him that I might try to punish them for their engagement by liquidating assets impulsively. Ashley had prepared him for this moment, framing my strategic protection of assets as evidence of the very incompetence she was planning to document. Every move I made to protect myself became proof of the narrative she was building against me. The conversation ended with Miguel storming out, telling me that Ashley was right about needing professional intervention for our family dysfunction. He had become her perfect accomplice, genuinely believing that he was protecting me from myself while helping her orchestrate my destruction. The phone call that shattered any remaining illusions came on a rainy February morning. Ashley's voice was different this time, colder, stripped of the sweet concern she had maintained for 8 months. She had dropped the pretense, entirely speaking to me like a professional handling an obstinate client rather than a future daughter-in-law addressing her fiancé's mother. She told me that Miguel was struggling with my recent behavior, that my property sales had caused him significant emotional distress, that my refusal to support their wedding plans was creating relationship problems between them. According to Ashley, Miguel was experiencing anxiety, depression, and confusion about how to handle his mother's increasingly erratic choices. Ashley explained that she had been documenting these changes in Miguel's mental health, keeping careful records of how my actions were affecting his well-being. She had encouraged him to see a therapist who specialized in family trauma, someone who could help him process the difficult reality of having a parent whose judgment was deteriorating. When I asked what she meant by deteriorating judgment, Ashley's response was clinically precise. She cited specific examples: my sudden decision to sell properties without consulting family, my paranoid suspicions about her background, my inappropriate accusations about her motives, my social isolation and withdrawal from normal family activities. Everything I had done to protect myself had been reframed as symptoms of mental decline. My strategic thinking became paranoia. My boundary setting became social withdrawal. My financial planning became impulsive decision-making. Ashley had transformed my defensive moves into evidence supporting her offensive strategy. The most chilling part of our conversation was Ashley's suggestion that we needed professional intervention to address our family crisis. She had researched specialists who understood complex family dynamics involving elderly parents and adult children, therapists who could facilitate healthy communication and help everyone make decisions that prioritize safety and well-being. She mentioned Dr. Patricia Williams, a geriatric psychiatrist who often worked with families navigating difficult transitions, someone who could evaluate our situation objectively and recommend appropriate next steps. Ashley had already contacted Dr. Williams' office to discuss our case, providing background information about the family dynamics and concerning behaviors that needed professional assessment. When I refused to participate in any evaluation, Ashley's mask slipped completely. She told me that my resistance to help was itself a symptom of the problem, that people experiencing cognitive decline often lacked insight into their condition. She suggested that if I would not seek help voluntarily, other options were available to ensure my safety and Miguel's well-being. The threat was delivered with professional courtesy, but it was unmistakably a threat. Ashley was moving to the final phase of her plan. The intervention came on a bright Tuesday morning in March, orchestrated with the precision of a military operation. I was drinking coffee on my condo balcony, watching surfers navigate the morning waves, when I heard multiple car doors slamming in the parking area below. Through my sliding glass door, I could see Miguel's truck, Ashley's Tesla, a white van with medical facility markings, and a sedan I did not recognize. The doorbell rang with the urgency of an emergency, and I opened it to find my son, flanked by 3 strangers and his fiancée. Miguel looked miserable, his eyes red-rimmed like he had been crying, his usual confidence replaced by the nervous energy of someone who had been convinced to do something against his better judgment. Ashley stood beside him, wearing what I had come to recognize as her professional demeanor, the concerned expression she had perfected during her years in social services. She introduced the man in the navy suit as Dr. Franklin from Peaceful Meadows Assessment Center, a facility that specialized in comprehensive mental health evaluations for older adults experiencing family concerns. The woman in medical scrubs was Nurse Patricia, Dr. Franklin's assessment specialist, who would be coordinating my evaluation process. The third stranger was a transport coordinator there to ensure my safety and comfort during what they described as a brief assessment period that would help everyone understand how to move forward constructively. Miguel finally spoke, his voice shaking as he explained that they were all there because they loved me, because they were worried about my well-being, because recent events had shown that I needed professional help to navigate this difficult period in my life. He recited Ashley's talking points about my concerning behaviors, the impulsive property sales, my social isolation, my paranoid accusations, my refusal to accept family support. Dr. Franklin consulted his clipboard and explained that my family had provided detailed documentation of behavioral changes suggesting possible cognitive decline or emotional disturbance. He mentioned that early intervention was crucial for maintaining quality of life, that comprehensive evaluation would help determine the appropriate level of support I needed. When I asked what would happen if I refused to participate, Dr. Franklin's response was delivered with clinical detachment. Family members could petition for emergency evaluation if they believed I posed a danger to myself or others through impaired judgment. The process would be much more comfortable if I cooperated voluntarily. Ashley's hand rested on Miguel's shoulder as she assured me that everyone just wanted what was best for our family, that this was an opportunity to get professional help for the communication problems we had been experiencing. Peaceful Meadows Assessment Center looked exactly like what it was, a place where inconvenient people disappeared. The lobby featured generic artwork and motivational posters about healing and family support, but the locked doors and security protocols made it clear that leaving was not optional once you arrived. Dr. Franklin transferred my care to Dr. Sandra Reyes, a psychiatrist who appeared young enough to be my daughter, but spoke with the authority of someone who had processed hundreds of cases like mine. She explained that I would undergo comprehensive evaluation over the next 72 hours, cognitive testing, psychological assessment, medical examination, and family dynamic analysis. The questions started immediately. Could I tell her what year it was, who the president was, where I was currently located? When I answered correctly, Dr. Reyes made careful notes and moved to more complex inquiries about my recent decision making, my relationships with family members, my emotional state regarding the changes in my life. I answered honestly and completely, explaining my concerns about Ashley's background, my strategic reasoning for selling the properties, my awareness of the manipulation tactics being used against my son. Dr. Reyes listened with professional neutrality, occasionally asking for clarification about specific incidents or timeline details. But I could see in her expressions that my responses were being filtered through the narrative Ashley had already established. My knowledge of Ashley's criminal history became paranoid delusion. My financial planning became impulsive behavior. My protective strategies became evidence of disturbed thinking patterns. The psychological testing was extensive: memory assessments, cognitive evaluations, emotional stability measurements. I performed well on every objective measure, but subjective interpretation allowed room for concerning conclusions about my mental state and family relationships. During my second day, I befriended Rosa Martinez, a nurse who had worked at Peaceful Meadows for 12 years. Rosa had seen every type of family crisis, every kind of manipulation, every variety of elder abuse disguised as loving concern. She recognized the pattern of my situation immediately. Rosa told me that families like mine arrived regularly. Adult children, convinced their parents needed intervention, professional caregivers, or romantic partners guiding the process, comprehensive documentation supporting incompetency claims. Most elderly patients accepted their fate medicated into compliance and transferred to long-term care facilities, while family members redistributed their assets. But Rosa also mentioned that occasionally patients arrived who were smarter than their families, realized people who had prepared for exactly this scenario. She offered to help me document every interaction, every test result, every conversation that occurred during my evaluation. Sometimes, Rosa explained, the system could be used to protect people instead of victimizing them. On my second evening at Peaceful Meadows, Rosa brought me a sealed envelope that had arrived through the facility's legal mail system. Inside were documents from Elena Morales and a handwritten note from Detective Maria Santos that made my heart race with hope and vindication. Maria had been conducting her own investigation into Ashley's activities, working with law enforcement agencies in Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado to build a comprehensive case against her. The detective explained that my situation had provided the missing piece. They needed a victim who had recognized the scheme early enough to document it properly and fight back effectively. The evidence was overwhelming. Elena had traced Ashley's movements across 4 states over 6 years, identifying at least 9 elderly victims who had been systematically isolated, evaluated, and institutionalized. While their assets were redistributed to family members Ashley had manipulated. The total financial damage exceeded $8 million, representing lifetimes of savings stolen through legal manipulation. Most damning was Ashley's collection of personal items. From her victim's evidence, Maria's team had discovered during a search of Ashley's storage unit in National City. The engagement ring Miguel had supposedly bought was there along with watches, jewelry, and family photographs belonging to people who had died alone in facilities while Ashley spent their inheritances. Maria's note explained that they had been building their case carefully, waiting for Ashley to make her next move so they could catch her in the act of orchestrating another competency scheme. My cooperation had given them real-time documentation of her methods, recorded conversations that demonstrated her manipulation tactics, and evidence of the systematic approach she used to destroy families. The detective had coordinated with Roberto to ensure my evaluation at Peaceful Meadows would serve dual purposes, protecting me from Ashley's scheme while gathering final evidence needed for prosecution. Dr. Reyes was cooperating with law enforcement, documenting Ashley's coaching of Miguel and her attempts to influence the evaluation process. Rosa had been recording every conversation Ashley had with facility staff, every suggestion she made about my treatment, every recommendation she offered about my long-term care needs. The nurse explained that Ashley had been providing detailed input about my case, sharing supposed family history and behavioral observations that painted me as increasingly unstable and dangerous. But Ashley had made a crucial mistake. She had assumed I was helpless, that elderly people caught in her web had no resources to fight back. She had underestimated the power of preparation, the value of loyal friends, and the determination of a mother protecting herself from destruction. The trap was about to close around her instead of around me. Dr. Reyes delivered the evaluation results with obvious reluctance, her professional demeanor barely concealing disappointment that I would not be staying at Peaceful Meadows permanently. After 72 hours of comprehensive testing, she had found no evidence of cognitive impairment, mental illness, or diminished capacity that would justify continued treatment or guardianship proceedings. Miguel arrived to collect me, with Ashley beside him, both wearing expressions of concern mixed with confusion. They had expected different results, a diagnosis that would validate their intervention and justify the next phase of Ashley's plan. Instead, they faced the awkward reality of having committed a competent woman to psychiatric evaluation based on fabricated concerns. During the drive back to my condo, Ashley worked to salvage the situation, suggesting that stress might have temporarily masked underlying issues, that perhaps I needed ongoing monitoring to ensure my continued well-being. She mentioned follow-up appointments with specialists who could provide more comprehensive assessment over time. But I had other plans for our next interaction. When we arrived at my building, I invited them both up for dinner, suggesting we needed to rebuild our relationship after this difficult experience. Miguel seemed relieved at my apparent willingness to move forward positively, while Ashley's smile appeared more calculated, like she was already planning her next approach. At 7 o'clock exactly, Miguel and Ashley knocked on my door, carrying flowers and wine, ready to begin what they thought would be a reconciliation dinner. Instead, they found Detective Maria Santos and 2 other officers waiting in my living room, alongside Elena Morales and Roberto Valdez. The look on Ashley's face when she saw Maria was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty I had endured over the past 10 months. Recognition flashed in her eyes as she realized that her carefully constructed scheme had been exposed, that the helpless elderly victim she had been manipulating had been gathering evidence against her the entire time. Miguel's confusion was heartbreaking, but necessary. He demanded to know what was happening, why police were in my home, what kind of trap I had orchestrated against the woman he loved. His genuine bewilderment demonstrated how completely Ashley had manipulated him, how thoroughly she had convinced him that I was the problem requiring intervention. Maria read Ashley her rights while explaining the charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, elder, theft by deception, and falsifying medical documentation. The evidence included recorded conversations, financial records, testimony from previous victims, and physical evidence linking her to crimes across multiple states. As they led Ashley away in handcuffs, she finally dropped her mask, completely screaming at me that I had destroyed my son's happiness just to prove I was smarter than everyone thought. After the police cars disappeared down the street, Miguel and I sat in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of Ashley's deception. Elena had left copies of her investigation files, and Miguel read through them with growing horror, discovering the true identity of the woman he had planned to marry. The photographs of Ashley's previous victims hit him hardest: elderly faces of people who had died alone in facilities, while their families spent inheritances Ashley had helped them steal. The engagement ring he had supposedly saved months to buy had belonged to Margaret Thornfield, whose granddaughter had described watching her grandmother fade away in a memory care unit, confused and abandoned. Miguel's emotional breakdown was devastating to witness. My strong, confident son dissolved into tears as he realized how completely he had been manipulated, how Ashley had used his love for her as a weapon against his own mother. He apologized repeatedly, his voice breaking, as he tried to understand how he had become part of a scheme to destroy the woman who had raised him. I watched my child grapple with the reality that everything he had believed about our relationship over the past 10 months had been carefully constructed lies. Ashley had convinced him that I was controlling, paranoid, and increasingly unstable, while she was the reasonable voice trying to protect both of us from my deteriorating mental state. The most painful revelation was learning how Ashley had coached Miguel to interpret my normal behavior as signs of cognitive decline. My repeated stories became evidence of memory loss. My financial planning became impulsive decision-making. My protective instincts became paranoid delusions. She had turned his love for me into a tool for documenting my supposed incompetence. Miguel asked how I had known to investigate Ashley, how I had recognized her manipulation when he had been completely blind to it. I explained about maternal instincts, about the value of life experience, about the importance of trusting your gut when something feels wrong, even if you cannot immediately prove it. But I also acknowledged my own mistakes. I had been so focused on protecting my assets that I had failed to protect my relationship with my son. I had let Ashley drive a wedge between us instead of fighting harder to maintain our connection, allowing her to isolate us from each other while she built her case against me. The rebuilding process would be slow and difficult. Trust once broken does not heal overnight. Miguel would need to learn to forgive himself for being manipulated, while I would need to forgive him for choosing Ashley over me even temporarily. Some damage could not be undone, but love could be stronger than betrayal if we both committed to the work ahead. The months following Ashley's arrest were the hardest of my life, even more difficult than losing Eduardo. Grief has a clear target, but rebuilding trust requires facing the uncomfortable reality that people you love can hurt you deeply even when they believe they are helping. Miguel moved out of the Maple Street house immediately unable to remain in the space Ashley had transformed into their supposed dream home. He found a small apartment in Pacific Beach, nothing fancy, just a clean start away from the memories of manipulation and lies. For the first time in years, he was truly independent, paying his own bills and making his own decisions without anyone's influence. Our conversations were awkward, initially both of us walking carefully around the wreckage Ashley had created between us. Miguel struggled with guilt and embarrassment, constantly apologizing for his role in the scheme, while I wrestled with my own anger and disappointment at how easily he had been turned against me. We started meeting for coffee once a week at a neutral location, the Panican in Encinitas, where Eduardo and I used to read Sunday papers together. These sessions felt like therapy without the therapist, two people slowly learning to trust each other again after a profound betrayal. Miguel began seeing Dr. James Morrison, a psychologist who specialized in helping people recover from manipulative relationships. Through therapy, he learned to recognize the subtle ways Ashley had isolated him from his support system, convinced him to doubt his own perceptions, and gradually rewired his thinking to serve her purposes. The hardest part for Miguel was accepting that his feelings for Ashley had been genuine, even though her feelings for him had been completely fabricated. Dr. Morrison helped him understand that being a victim of manipulation did not make him weak or stupid. It made him human and trusting qualities that had been weaponized against him. I started my own counseling with Dr. Lisa Hernandez, working through my anger at Miguel and my guilt about the choices I had made to protect myself. Dr. Hernandez helped me understand that setting boundaries was not selfish, that protecting my assets had been necessary survival, not punishment of my son. Slowly, we began rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than obligation. Miguel learned to share his struggles without asking for financial rescue, while I learned to offer support without trying to control his choices. We established new traditions that belonged to us alone, untainted by Ashley's manipulation. The beach house was gone, but we found new places to create memories together. Ashley's trial began 8 months after her arrest, with victims testifying from across the country about the systematic destruction she had brought to their families. The prosecution had built an airtight case using the evidence we had gathered, financial records Elena had uncovered, and testimony from the families whose lives Ashley had shattered. Miguel testified about how Ashley had manipulated him into believing I was mentally incompetent, how she had coached him to document normal behavior as signs of cognitive decline, His testimony was crucial because it demonstrated her manipulation tactics from the perspective of someone who had genuinely believed he was helping his mother. The most powerful moment came when Margaret Thornfield's granddaughter identified the engagement ring Ashley had been wearing, the family heirloom that had disappeared during her grandmother's final months. The courtroom fell silent as she described visiting her grandmother in the memory care facility, watching a brilliant woman fade away while strangers spent her life savings. Ashley received a 15-year federal sentence for elder fraud, with additional time for the theft and conspiracy charges. The judge noted that she had shown no remorse for destroying families and stealing lifetimes of savings from vulnerable elderly victims. Her professional background in social services made her crimes particularly heinous because she had used her expertise to exploit the very people she had been trained to protect. But justice for Ashley was only part of my story's resolution. Maria Santos introduced me to other families who had been targeted by similar schemes, people who needed guidance navigating the complex systems designed to protect elderly adults, but often used to exploit them instead. I found myself becoming an unexpected advocate, using my experience to help other families recognize manipulation tactics and protect their assets from predatory relatives and caregivers. Roberto helped me establish a small foundation that provided legal resources for elderly individuals facing questionable competency challenges. The work was emotionally demanding, but deeply satisfying. I spoke at senior centers about recognizing elder abuse, consulted with attorneys handling similar cases, and provided support for families torn apart by financial manipulation. My background as a high school principal had prepared me for educating people about recognizing and resisting predatory behavior. My story had become a cautionary tale that could protect others from experiencing the same betrayal and manipulation. Every family I helped meant another Ashley could not succeed, another elderly person who would not die alone in a facility while strangers spent their inheritance. Sometimes the most meaningful purpose comes from surviving something terrible and using that survival to help others fight their own battles. As I sit here in my Carlsbad condo 2 years later, watching the Pacific waves roll endlessly toward shore, I reflect on everything this experience taught me about love, trust, and the difference between protecting and enabling the people we care about most. Miguel and I have rebuilt our relationship into something stronger than what we had before Ashley's manipulation nearly destroyed us. He is thriving in his new job at a sustainable technology company, dating someone wonderful who encourages his relationship with his family rather than trying to destroy it. We have dinner every other Sunday now, a tradition that belongs entirely to us. The beach house is gone, but I do not mourn its loss anymore. That house represented my past with Eduardo, beautiful memories that no one could steal, regardless of who owned the property. My smaller condo represents my future, independent, secure, and filled with purpose that extends far beyond my own family. The foundation I established has helped over 200 families recognize and combat elder abuse schemes. We have prevented millions of dollars in theft and kept dozens of elderly individuals out of inappropriate care facilities. Every success story reminds me that surviving Ashley's manipulation was not just about protecting myself. It was about gaining the knowledge to protect others. People often ask if I regret how harshly I responded to Ashley's scheme, whether I wish I had tried to handle things more gently to preserve my relationship with Miguel. The answer is always the same. Protecting yourself from abuse is not harsh. It is necessary. Being a mother does not mean accepting manipulation, and loving your children does not require tolerating their participation in your destruction. The most important lesson I learned is that unconditional love does not mean unconditional acceptance of harmful behavior. Setting boundaries is not punishment, it is survival. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst choices, even when those choices are being manipulated by someone else. Ashley is serving her sentence in federal prison, where she will have 15 years to consider the lives she destroyed through greed and manipulation. Her victims are slowly rebuilding their families and their trust in each other, proving that predators can be defeated when their targets refuse to remain silent. If you are watching this and recognize similar patterns in your own family, please do not wait to seek help. Trust your instincts, document everything, and remember that you are never too old to fight back against people who underestimate your strength. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe, share your own experiences in the comments, and remember that your voice matters in protecting our community from predators who target our most vulnerable members. Sometimes the hand that feeds you needs to stop feeding before it gets bitten off completely.